Hello and welcome to my studio. I'm Ambah and I design patterns for knitters. Today I have a tutorial for you for the Astria Hat pattern, which was inspired by the Astria shawl design. Both the Astria Hat and the Astria shawl feature a unique shaping, which begins with a Turkish cast on and stitches are then worked increasing into an arch shape, which is a lot of fun to play with colour. With the hat, increases are worked to the centre and then decreases are worked for the other side, ending with a 3 needle bind off here to join it. Stitches are then picked up around the bottom for the ribbing, which can be knit longer or shorter depending on your desired fit. Today's tutorial covers all these techniques. As well as being a fun knit, the hat has lots of colour possibilities, and all of these options are included in the pattern. A colour block version where you can use up lots of those yummy leftovers. A stripe version. In my stripe version here I have worked a colour change yarn for the blue section, which is a little bit tricky to see, it's not that bold. It makes a nice added dimension to the hat. And also a fade version where I use lots of little leftovers from a festive kit for this project. Highly satisfying. And let's get knitting. Gather your supplies, you'll need your yarn, stitch markers and preferred needles for tight circumference knitting, either cables for magic loop or DPNs to get around that tight U-shaped curve that you'll be knitting. I'll be using magic loop here. We'll be using the Turkish cast on method, which begins with a slip knot loop placed on one of the needles. That needle will be parallel to the other and will sit on the bottom of the two needles. And then you'll make the stitches by wrapping the yarn around both needles. One wrap equals 2 stitches, one for the top needle and one for the bottom. So for 22 stitches you'll need to wrap 11 times. Don't count the slip knot stitch, you'll take that off in the next row. To work the first row, which is a setup row, pull out the bottom needle and use it to knit across the stitches on the top needle. Just knit them regularly. As you'll be setting up this row, place markers as you're knitting. The first marker will be placed after 9 stitches, and I have used quite a distinctive marker to mark the first stitch here. The side that's facing you now will become the wrong side, so the first setup row is technically a wrong side row, and place markers for the last couple of stitches on that first needle. Then you will turn the work clockwise so that the stitches that were on the bottom are now on the top needle, and you'll be knitting across those. You'll pull that bottom needle out, pull the slip knot off and just hold the yarn behind, bring the working yarn up to secure it and knit across the second half of the stitches. You'll be placing 2 markers here along the way and then knit the final 9 stitches. After knitting the 22 stitches, instead of rotating the work clockwise, you will turn it. So you're working back across the stitches just worked. Currently knitting a wrong side row, and the next row will be our right side row. So the stitches just work, turn them around, and you'll work back across those. Pull that bottom needle out, to work across what is now the top row of stitches, and you can tell where the working yarn is, that it's coming out from those stitches. If you continue to go around, you'll end up working in the round and forming a tube. So be sure to turn the work and work back and forth for each row. So we've worked casting on the 22 stitches, the setup row, placing the markers, and now we're working the first right side row. Knitting back across those stitches, 11, slipping the markers as we go. At the end of the row, rotate the work clockwise so that the stitches that were on the bottom are now on the top, and you're going to knit across those. So once you finish the right side row across both needles, turn the work, and you'll now be knitting the wrong side row. You can tell it's the wrong side row because there's a little stockingette strip only on the wrong side, just for the cast on section. On the right side it's garter stitch. This will help you be able to tell for the first few rows. Another trick I have to remember, which is the wrong side row, is that when I was placing the markers on the setup row, which was also the wrong side row, the first marker I placed was the dangly heart marker. This is a good visual reminder that I'm on the wrong side row and I might need to increase on this row. For the first wrong side row, I will be increasing, and I'm making one left after the marker. And I'll do that after each marker for this first wrong side row. Slide my marker back on for that last marker and pick up the bar between the stitches in that little U there and make one left, and that will secure that last marker in place. Turn the work clockwise to work across the rest of the stitches. The stitches that were on the bottom are now on top, and I'll pull that bottom needle out to work across them. And continue to increase as we do the second half of that wrong side row. So knit one, the marker, and then the increase will be after the marker for this row, and continue across the row. At the end of this row, you'll start to see it taking shape. You see the straight edge, which will become the edge where the brim is knit from. Turn the work so that now the right side row is facing you. You've got only garter ridges on that side. It's quite clear to see. And for this right side row, you'll just be knitting across all of the stitches. I've skipped ahead 3 rows. I knit that right side row, a wrong side row without increases, and another right side row. Around here, I might put in a little reminder of which side is the right side and which side's the wrong side. You could do that earlier, just to keep it super clear, because garter stitch can be hard to tell. And this wrong side row is an increase row. So I want to be sure that I increase, and this time the increases will be before the marker. And finish that increase row. It's starting to get a little easier to work around the U shape. And you can see how that works when I place it against the hat. Before long, I'll be able to just knit it back and forth across the row without worrying about magic loop. You can pretty much start it now. And continue to grow your Astria hat. Okay, time for a 3-needle bind off to join that little seam that we have left, having increased and decreased back to the other side. We need to join these live stitches together. You'll need to remove the markers at some point. The final row is a good place to do that. Get rid of the markers and then divide the 22 stitches across the 2 needles, holding your work inside out. So you want the wrong side facing you for this. Again, you could either use 2 DPNs or your cable needles. Spread the stitches evenly across the 2 needles and hold them parallel to each other. You'll need a 3rd needle to work the 3-needle bind off. The working yarn will be on the back needle. Insert the 3rd needle through the first 2 stitches of each of the other 2 needles. Knit them together and pull the single stitch off both needles. And repeat that so that you'll have 2 stitches on your 3rd needle. And then you just pull the first stitch over the 2nd stitch, knit, and cast that stitch off. So you're working a standard bind off. The only difference is that the first stitch knit, you're knitting 2 stitches together, 1 from each needle. And repeat until you get to the end, and you'll have a little seam joining your hat together. Next step is picking up the edge stitches so that you can knit the brim down. Use the yarn that you'd like for your brim colour and have the hat so that the right side is facing you, facing out. And with your needle, you'll be picking up and knitting 1 stitch for every garter ridge, or 1 stitch per 2 rows. So 2 rows forms a garter ridge. So you'll insert the needle just neatly between each of the garter ridges, and you'll pick up 2 legs of yarn between the garter ridges and the edge of the work. That's 1 for each row. And then with your working yarn, knit that stitch and pull that through. So insert the needle between 2 garter ridges, pick up the 2 legs of yarn and work a knit stitch. You can see that I'm now collecting purple stitches on my needles and they're attached to the hat. Continue all the way around, picking up 1 stitch per garter ridge, or 1 stitch per 2 rows. And if you do that correctly, you'll have an even number of stitches which you'll need to work the twisted ribbing. Once you've worked your way all the way around and picked up all the stitches, you'll place a marker for the beginning of the round and you'll continue to work around in the same direction. So you'll knit in the round at this point. The first row is just a knit row, so knit the first round. Knit in the round at this point. The first row is just a knit row, so knit the first round. I used a tubular bind off to keep the rim nice and stretchy for this hat, and I'll show you how to do that. You'll need to cut a length of yarn around 4 times the width of the hat and thread it onto your darning needle. You'll need quite a bit of yarn for this. The first 2 stitches are set-up stitches, so in that first knit stitch you'll insert the needle purlwise and thread it through. Then insert the needle from behind the work through to the front and then knitwise through the purl stitch that is second. The next, you'll slip knitwise through that first knit stitch and slip it off the needle. Then insert the needle purlwise through that second knit stitch, purl through the first purl stitch and slip that off the needle. You'll keep repeating these 4 steps. I remind myself by what the first stitch is. If the first stitch is knit, then I will knit through the second stitch and knit that first stitch off the needle. If the first stitch is purl, then I'll purl through the second stitch and then purl the first stitch off the needle. Continue around until you get to the last stitch and tie that off. Weave in the ends and block your project. I had fun making a fade version. I gathered together lots of little leftovers I had from a gradient set. Worked out approximately how much I'd need. I weighed the yarn and I just knit each colour until it ran out. I figured out where I wanted the centre colour, so I made sure I used the colours evenly to that point. It's a really fun way to use up leftovers. I started by arranging my colours so that they're in a nice fade sequence, figuring out what would look the nicest, and had fun knitting. Blocking tip. It can be great to have a glass head or a plastic head, mannequin head to block your hats on, and they also are a fantastic way for you to display them, as obviously they give you that beautiful natural shape for the hat. It makes such a difference in blocking. If you don't have a head, you can also use a balloon and have great results with that too. Blow up the balloon to the size that you need and put your wet blocked hat over the top of that. Usually just stand it in a bowl so it stays in place, and it will shape your hat beautifully. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial today. Thanks for watching today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find links to the pattern below and also ways to connect with me.